March 21st, 1981, Mobile, Alabama. In the dead of night, a tree was found with something strange hanging from it. It was the lifeless body of a young black man, a victim of a horrific act of violence. He had been beaten, strangled, and in his final moments, his life was taken in a cruel and deliberate manner. But even that wasn't enough for his killers. They left him hanging, a grim message to the world. His name was Michael Donald, and he was just 19 years old. The police was alerted, but they took a brief look at his body and shrugged. Just another black man in the wrong woods, they said. Whoever did this to him was confident, arrogant enough that they weren't going to be caught. After all, they wore white hoods and burned crosses. But what they didn't realize was that the night the Klan members in Alabama hanged that poor black man from the tree, they may as well have sealed the fate of one of the Klan's most powerful factions. They had awakened a grieving mother's fury, and their lives, their organization's integrity, and their names would be destroyed in its wake. To understand how one woman brought one of America's oldest organizations to its knees, we need to go back to Delisle, Mississippi, where on October 10th, 1920, a girl named Beulah May was born into a world that offered her people little more than hardship and hatred. Her father, Marion Gregory, was one of the countless black men who worked the sawmills of the Deep South. Day after day, he would return home with sawdust in his clothes and splinters in his hands, carrying just enough money to keep his family alive. But alive wasn't enough. He wanted his 8 children to thrive. Her mother, Mary Gregory, was a laundress. In the sweltering Mississippi heat, she would wash and iron clothes of white families, a job that barely paid enough to put food on the table. But Mary Gregory knew something about dignity. She taught her children that poverty might determine their circumstances, but it would never determine their worth. Like many black children of her time, she balanced her schoolwork with helping her family survive. But in 10th grade, she got pregnant, and in the segregated South of 1936, that meant the end of her education. She left school and began working in a hotel to support herself. At just 16 years old, she married William Miller and traded her classroom for a hotel cleaning cart. The same hands that once held textbooks now scrubbed floors and changed sheets. But Beulah May wasn't finished writing her story. Through it all, she found solace in her faith. The Southern Baptist Convention became her sanctuary, and in those wooden pews, surrounded by hymns and prayers, she built the foundation of her strength, a strength that would one day shake the pillars of white America to their core. By the 1960s, Beulah May was divorced and raising 2 children on her own. Then she met David Donald. Their marriage brought 5 more children, including her youngest, Michael. But this marriage, too, would end in divorce when David moved to New York City. Beulah May had a choice: follow her husband north or stay in the South. She chose to return to Mobile, Alabama, where her aging parents needed her care. In Mobile's public housing, Beulah Mae Donald raised her children with the same dignity her mother had taught her. She worked hard, loved fiercely, and held fast to her faith. This was the same woman who would one day make history, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. A hotel worker and single mother. When the Klan took her youngest son from her, they thought they could get away with it. They thought they were messing with a powerless black woman. Well, they thought wrong. By the way, if you enjoy this type of content and want to see more videos about the heroes of Black history, please subscribe to the channel. It means a lot to us and helps us spread awareness about our fight for freedom. On that fateful night on March 21st, 1981, Michael was working at the Mobile Press Register and was attending Carver State Technical College. That week in Birmingham, a trial had ended. A black man, accused of eliminating a white police officer, walked free when the jury couldn't reach a verdict. For the United Klans of America, this was an insult that demanded blood. They didn't care whose blood any black man would do. And so that evening, they prowled Mobile's streets looking for someone guilty of being black. And Michael Donald was walking home. What happened next was an act of calculated terror. They forced him into their car. They beat him. They choked him. Then, as if to announce their barbarism to the world, they hanged his body from a tree. But the Klan wasn't finished. That same night, while a mother still waited for her son to come home, they burned a cross on the Mobile County Courthouse lawn. It was their signature, their celebration, their message to every black person in Mobile. This could be you. This could be your child. The next morning, Mobile awakened to what should have been unthinkable in 1981. A young black man hanging from a tree, a hate crime as old as the South itself. Naturally, the police had their own story ready before the investigation even began. A street deal gone wrong, they said. Maybe an affair with the wrong woman. Anything but what it clearly was. Anything but the truth. Beulah May Donald already knew in her bones, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. This was a woman who had cleaned hotel rooms to feed her children and had chosen duty over comfort, built a life from nothing but faith and determination. And now, they were telling her that her youngest son, who worked at the local newspaper and attended technical college, was mixed up in illegal substances. As weeks turned into months, the investigation stalled. The same police department that had been quick to blame Michael was now slow to find his killers. But by the summer of 1981, protests filled the streets of Mobile, demanding the investigation continue. The community wouldn't let Michael's murder be forgotten or dismissed. The streets of downtown Mobile filled with protesters, but they weren't just marching for Michael anymore. They were marching for every black child who'd ever been called a criminal, every mother who'd ever been told to accept injustice as the natural order of things. For 2 years, Beulah May Donald fought a system designed to silence her. She refused to let her son be branded a criminal. She refused to let his murder be forgotten. While the local police tried to bury the case, she kept building pressure. She worked closely with U.S. Attorney Thomas Figures, who would become one of her strongest allies in the fight for justice. Together, they kept pushing the FBI to dig deeper, to ask harder questions, to follow leads the local authorities had ignored. In 1983, 2 names emerged: Henry Hayes and James Tiger Knowles, members of the United Klans of America. The case that police had tried to dismiss as a street deal was finally revealed for what it was. In a historic trial, Hayes faced a jury of 11 white people and 1 black person. The evidence was clear. The verdict was guilty. Henry Hayes would be sentenced to death, the first white man in Alabama to receive the death penalty for killing a black person since 1913. James Tiger Knowles made a different choice. He pleaded guilty and agreed to testify, trading the death penalty for life in prison. The truth of that night was finally coming to light, piece by brutal piece. Face to face with her son's killers, she did something extraordinary, something that would shake the foundations of hatred itself. To the men who had taken her child from her, she spoke words that would echo through history. "I do forgive you. From the day I found out who you all was, I asked God to take care of y'all, and He has." Even as the prosecution pushed for the death penalty, Beulah May stood firm in her opposition. The woman whose son had been shown no mercy now chose to show mercy herself. But make no mistake, her forgiveness wasn't weakness, it was strength, and she wasn't finished yet. While the criminals were finally convicted, Beulah had something else in mind. She had a bigger target, the organization that had bred these men, that had taught them hate, and that had set them loose on that March night to hunt for any black man they could find. The criminal courts had given her justice against 2 men, but Beulah knew it was just putting bandages to wound. She wanted to destroy the source of the disease, and she was about to take on the United Klans of America, one of the largest and most violent Klan groups in the nation. After the criminal convictions, Morris Dees from the Southern Poverty Law Center, an American nonprofit legal organization, saw an opportunity no one had ever tried before. In 1984, they filed a historic civil lawsuit, Beulah May Donald versus the United Klans of America. This wasn't just another civil suit. Dees and attorney Michael Figures, Thomas's brother, who had now taken Beulah's case, were about to argue something unprecedented, that the United Klans of America should be held responsible for training Henry Hayes and James Knowles, for teaching them to hate, for creating the climate that led to Michael Donald's murder. Their target was Unit 900. To understand the magnitude of what Beulah May Donald was about to accomplish, we need to understand what she was up against. The Klan wasn't just one organization, it was a network of different groups. The United Klans of America was one of its most powerful factions, operating across the nation. And in Mobile, Alabama, they had Unit 900, also known as Claiborne 900, one of their most violent local chapters. This wasn't just about one murder anymore. This was about dismantling a system that had operated with impunity for over a century. Figures and Dees would argue that when you train people for violence, you can't hide behind plausible deniability when they commit it. The Klan's lawyers saw the writing on the wall. They offered Beulah May Donald $1 million to settle quietly. It was life-changing money for a woman who had cleaned hotel rooms all her life, but they had fundamentally misunderstood who they were dealing with. She didn't want their money. She wanted every detail exposed in court. She wanted every connection between the Klan and her son's murder drawn in clear lines that no one could ignore. She wanted the truth, no matter the cost. On February 12, 1987, after 6 years of fighting, Beulah May Donald faced an all-white jury in Alabama. The same state where all-white juries had historically freed lynch mobs was about to make a different kind of history. $7 million in damages, but the money wasn't the real victory. This verdict established that hate groups could be held financially liable for the violence they promoted. It created the legal framework for bankrupting organizations that taught hate. Michael Figures and Morris Dees had created a blueprint for dismantling hate groups through the courts. By May 1987, the United Klans of America was finished. They surrendered the deed to their national headquarters in Tuscaloosa. The organization that had once terrorized the South was being dismantled not by federal troops or legislation, but by a mother's determination to find justice. The case set a precedent that would echo through American legal history. It established the foundation for civil suits against hate groups. After Beulah Mae Donald, no hate group could safely claim they weren't responsible for the violence they preached. By November 1987, the money still hadn't come, but when reporters asked Beulah May about it, she revealed the true heart of her fight. "I wanted to be assured. I wasn't even thinking about the money. If I hadn't gotten a cent, it wouldn't have mattered. I wanted to know how and why they did it." Michael Figures had recognized what they had achieved. She was the rock on which all of this was ultimately built. The recognition came swiftly. Ms. Magazine named her one of their 1987 Women of the Year. Essence Magazine honored her courage. The Candace Award in 1988 recognized what she had accomplished. On September 17, 1988, Beulah May Donald passed away from natural causes in a mobile hospital. She left no will, and her estate went to 2 of her daughters. But her real legacy was in the courtrooms of America, where her case had changed the rules of engagement in the fight against organized hate. Michael Figures was right when he called her the rock on which all of this was ultimately built, but even he might not have seen how far her influence would reach. Today, every lawsuit that holds a hate group accountable for violence, every case that follows the money trail of organized hatred, every victory won in civil court against those who preach violence, all of them stand on the foundation that Beulah May Donald built. She never sought vengeance. She sought truth, and in finding it, she gave America something more powerful than any weapon, a way to fight hate with the law itself, a way to make those who preach violence answer for its consequences, a way to bring down the mighty not with force, but with justice. If you want to learn more about freedom fighters who stood up for Black justice, check out our video on Fred Hampton, the Black Messiah.